We are now going to hear another perspective from, so to say, the other end of the world, I think one can say. I'm very happy to present Gina Cass-Gottlieb. Is she with us? Yeah, Gina, here we go. I don't know if you have ever been to Australia. I have, and I can tell you that is quite an issue to travel around the world and then give a presentation at a conference. Gina is, I think I can still say, the newly appointed chairwoman of the ACCC. Many thanks that you are with us. And Gina will be moderated by our colleague Martijn Snoep. Martijn is the chairman of the Netherlands Authority for Consumers and Markets. Martijn, a warm welcome here in Berlin. Both of you, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and thank you very much. It's a great honor to introduce to you the newly elected chair of the ACCC, Gina Cass-Gottlieb, and we'll have a 15-minute conversation just to introduce you to the international competition community and to hear your ideas and thoughts and also learn from your experience. Because Gina was, she had two bachelor degrees in law and economics, a master in law, and then joined a major international Australian law firm and worked in the competition practice until March 2022. By then, she became the first female chair of the ACCC. And the ACCC, I can say that, is one of the most prominent competition authorities in the world, with a thought leader in integrating competition and consumer protection. It's well known for its organization, its professionalism, and with a leading role in unilateral conduct in the digital economy. And therefore, Gina, I think it's a great opportunity to learn from you what your thoughts are and how you look at your work and your future work in the digital economy. But I wanted to start first is also to learn a little bit about yourself. Is what motivated you to join the ACCC?
Thanks very much, Martijn, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here and to represent the Southern Hemisphere. And I want to thank Andreas and Barbara and also Martijn and Bart for the preparation for this session. So I did spend over 30 years working as a competition lawyer in private practice. In that time, I often sought out the opportunity to engage in policy. So we acted for Australian state and the national government in regulatory reform projects, and also gave the early advice to the Hong Kong government on the framing of the Hong Kong competition law. So we always sought out the ability to engage in a broader way. And after those 30 years, I wished to make a real contribution from a public interest point of view, so joined the fantastic team at the ACCC.
Fantastic. And just for those in the audience who are also new to the job, maybe what did you do to prepare?
That's a good question. So I had a number of months in which I wound down practice, and in those times the ACCC heads of each of the branches, and it's a very broad, as Martijn explained, so we have competition, consumer protection, sector-specific infrastructure regulation, agriculture, insurance, telecommunications, energy. So there was much to cover, and also importantly product safety. So there was very much to cover. So I had spent a number of months with incoming briefs. I was apparently the first chair of the ACCC that asked to shadow the existing chair. So I had 2 weeks while Rod Sims was still the chair, where I could observe how the range of his week, how he ran, what he was doing. So it was a great opportunity. I also did media training, which taught me how to engage in ways that were not intuitive as a forensic lawyer, but have turned out to be really critical, because the capacity to communicate to the Australian public about the importance of the work that we're doing, I knew Rod had put a huge amount of effort into, and though it was frankly, a bit beyond my comfort zone. I knew I had to step up and do it. So I had training and I did the first round in my first week and have done a lot since, including talkback radio and breakfast television.
Ah, good. And so you did media training with actual cameras,
Yes.
and then review of what was recorded and do it again.
Correct, and they told me everything that I was doing wrong, yes.
Very good. I think I'm very curious to hear is that also some in the audience come from private practice. I come from private practice myself and joined the authority. What do you think competition authorities can learn from law firms?
So I had a very particular experience. I started my time in a national law firm, became a very junior partner. It was very hierarchical, silos of information. In effect, partners competed with each other rather than being a team. I then had the great opportunity to join a very young firm where we were building from the ground up, and where it was a flat structure, everyone was acknowledged, everyone was encouraged to contribute. It created a cultural capacity to really, for everyone to work to their best, and the ACCC has those structures, but they are ones including in terms of supporting the policies, but fostering greater diversity and inclusion. It has been an experience that is valuable for me to bring, and which really emphasises what we are calling the employee value proposition, to build, retain and grow our best people. And the law firm I was working at gave me great experience in that.
And I think the law firm you were working at has also built a great institution, has a strong emphasis on human capital, on developing human capital, but it doesn't stop when people leave the firm. Is that something that competition authorities can learn?
So yes, alumni networks are important. They're important both to keep having reflection, but also to be advocates as they can be for agencies as well. And the ACCC seeks to keep that in an informal sense, and we can probably foster it even more. Yeah.
Do you have regular, do you keep alumni updated about developments at the ACCC? Is there an annual alumni party as some law firms have?
I don't think it's that structured. Alumni do attend events that we hold, but no, it's not as structured as it would be in a law firm.
Well, if I may, I can highly recommend that for competition authorities around the world to do that, because it's a great way to retain the emotional ties of your former employees, and also continue to keep ambassadors for your agency in the country you're working in. And I think this is typically something that major law firms have developed. Some have developed, and that competition authorities, like the ACCC, can learn from.
I agree. It also supports recruitment.
Yes, absolutely. Now, of course, now you're in your first 100 days, or your first 100 days. They are not yet over, but soon there will be over. Are there any new directions you want to steer the ACCC in? Do you see kind of a slight shift into a different direction that you can share with the audience?
So perhaps I'll start with the continuity, because I know how important that is for everyone, and the ACCC has been from early times a keen participant and contributor to the ICN and values it highly. The continuity is significantly in our digital platforms work. We have a report to our government scheduled for September this year, in which we are going to address the question of the harms that we have seen both from a competition perspective and consumer protection perspective, and the regulatory framework, whether we need additional supplementary regulatory tools, as everyone has been describing as ex-ante regulation, and what we recommend that to be. So at the same time as all of the developments that have been discussed over the last day in relation to Europe and also the United States, we are looking to really land what we recommend in this time. Secondly, very importantly for the future of Australia, we have a publicly invested, owned by our national government, National Broadband Network. That network has been regulated under an over 10 years old undertaking to the ACCC that needs variation. And we are looking at commencing consultation in a few weeks in relation to the terms which will cover access, pricing and quality of services, and an important underpinning to our economy. Where our enforcement priorities indicated a fresh perspective and where we are going to continue to work is in relation to environmental sustainability. We have referred to our concerns about greenwashing, both from a consumer protection point of view and misleading and deceptive conduct point of view, where they are unwarranted and not justified, and also from competitive detriments, as well as between businesses that genuinely invest and those that fraudulently claim that they are. But in addition, we are seeing effects in other parts of our work. Many parts from a business and home and consumer point of view are uninsurable in Australia due to the effects of climate change. The ACCC has been asked to report and to supervise a government reinsurance pool. So it is already touching as it touches all of us, but we are looking to expand our engagement in those issues. Yeah.
Very, very interesting, and it would be wonderful if you could share that experience in next time at the next ICN meeting, because it's a topic that is close to the hearts, I think, of many of us, and it's growing into importance. And focusing a little bit on the digital economy, which seems to be the main topic also of this ICN conference. Are there any particular theories of harm or particular market problems that you are focusing on? Because as Margrethe Versteer was saying, we have to work together. We have to also make sure that we're not all doing the same thing and have a bandwagon of copycat decisions, but that we kind of spread the work and focus maybe on different areas so that we can also learn from each other.
So the reports that we have done have looked across the full span of competition concerns and consumer protection concerns. We currently have investigations running in relation to Apple's practice of restricting third-party access to the NFC on mobile devices. Coming out of our Google ad tech inquiry, we're looking at the limiting of access of third-party demand-side platforms to YouTube for advertising purposes and advertising inventory, and multiple examples of self-preferencing. We're also investigating completed mergers. From an enforcement perspective, the Google acquisition of Fitbit and Meta's acquisition of Giphy. Perhaps where we have the flexibility of a broad consumer protection as well as competition toolkit is in our consumer protection actions. We have taken and already obtained federal court judgment in our favour in relation to Google location conduct, in relation to collecting, keeping, using data which consumers were unaware was being collected and were unaware how it was being used. We have also taken in relation to Google DoubleClick similar actions, consumer protection, but always built upon the market power that resides in the way Google sits as a gatekeeper across both sides of the consumer experience, supplier advertiser experience. Last week we commenced proceedings including with admissions by Uber in relation to misleading representations in the Uber rideshare app that had affected consumers from misleading cancellation warnings, in fact false cancellation fee warnings, during the Uber cancellation fee-free period, and misleading estimates in the app as to what a taxi fare would be as compared to the rideshare fare. Probably perhaps most interesting to many people in the Uber proceeding and in our proceeding against Trivago, where we were successful for misleading representation that they were giving users the best and cheapest rate when actually the algorithm favoured the highest payment per click, so commission, that Trivago received from the hotel booking sites. Then in both of those we obtained the algorithms. Our strategic data analysis unit was able to analyse the source code and the data and to present, in the case of Trivago, evidence, including with expert evidence, where the federal court, the judge found that accepted the expert evidence on how the algorithm worked and that it produced an outcome contrary in 67% of occasions to the representations that were made.
No, that's very impressive.
Yeah.
That is very impressive. Because was that the first time for the ACCC to present this kind of algorithmic evidence in court?
It was.
Very good. Well, maybe a final question, because I think we could continue for another hour, and we only have 15 minutes. But is there something? What is the main obstacle you think for the ACCC in interventions in the digital economy, and how do you overcome that obstacle?
So, I think there's a few, and international cooperation is an important response to a number of the most important ones. The first is one we all share, which is prioritising. There is a deluge of concerns and problems here, and so choosing which, from a consumer point of view, and we are rooted in the harm that the community is facing, is an important part of our processes. The second is, at times, the relevant group companies are not present in our jurisdiction, and we are unable to use, in a simple fashion, our compulsory powers to obtain the data and information that we need. And so the work that is being done in the ICN and through the OECD ICN project in enhancing our ability together to cooperate in information for enforcement purposes is very important to the ACCC. We've probably been more successful than we might have thought by what we try, but we need that supplement. Then the next part is that there is a significant crossover, as everybody has spoken about, between competition, consumer, privacy, use of data and abuse of data. In Australia, the way we are addressing that is we have a digital regulators forum with our privacy commissioner, our broadcasting commissioner and standards setting, so that we can try and work and step forward together and use all of our powers together. But the ICN intersection project is a critical way for us to share approaches and knowledge in this regard.
Well, thank you. I fully agree that cooperation between different regulators in the countries to really successfully intervene into the digital economy is crucial. And fortunately, around the world, we see many successful examples of that, like in Australia. Thank you very much, Gina, and for this frank and open discussion. I think it was very insightful for all of us, and please join me in an applause for Gina.
Many thanks for these thoughtful insights. And now we come to our first panel this morning. Unilateral Conduct Plenary Session is the next topic, and it will be about regulatory and competition law tools in digital markets. I think a very topical issue. So I may ask the panel to come up on the stage.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our plenary session on regulatory and competition law tools in digital markets. I'm Holly Vedova. I'm the director of the Bureau of Competition at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. Let me just quickly give the standard disclaimer that my remarks this morning are my own and not those of the FTC or any FTC commissioner. Before we begin, I'd like to say many thanks to our excellent hosts, the Bundeskartellamt, It's a real pleasure to be with you all at the ICN annual conference. I'm very excited about our discussion this morning. We're going to continue the discussion that we've already heard a lot about, and I think we've got good representation from around the globe here. So what we want to talk about is, with the adopted and proposed tech regulation, including most notably the Digital Markets Act, the Korean app markets proposals, as well as many others, I think we can agree that we have an opportunity for robust engagement. Our objective today is to share some of the thinking on how best to navigate the opportunities and challenges of a dual enforcement and ex-ante approach to combating anti-competitive conduct by the tech titans. Here with me to discuss this fascinating topic are President Benoît Cœuré of France's Autorité de la concurrence, Director General Olivier Guersent of DG Competition at the European Commission, Joint Law Director Pafna Gulati of the Competition Commission of India, and then Commissioner Yoon Soohyun of Korea's Fair Trade Commission, and President Andreas Mundt of Germany's Bundeskartellamt. We only have an hour, so I'd like to jump right in. I have 4 rounds of questions related to our topic that I plan to cover. So for our opening round, Andreas, Benoît, Pafna, and Olivier, I'd like you to each share your impressions on digital platform enforcement and about the current or future state of interplay between competition enforcement and new or proposed regulators that oversee digital competition. Tell us what's promising, what's of concern, what's still to be decided. Andreas, why don't we have you kick things off? Germany has been a real leader in adopting changes to address the power of tech companies, and you've been very vocal about the need to have enforcement operate alongside parallel regulations. So we're very interested to hear what you have to say.
Yes, many thanks, Holly. Well, I think we all have seen grow big tech getting bigger and bigger and richer and richer. They collected more data and more data. Network effects were growing, and all this happened. And I think we as competition agencies, I mean, you said it already, I think we really brought brilliant cases. They were good cases, and we're proud of that. But I always doubted that we as competition agencies really had the impact in the markets in order to be a game changer, in order really to make markets contestable, and in order really to give a chance to competitors. And all this issue is about competitors. I mean, I don't know about most competition agencies, but the Bundeskartellamt never ever received a complaint from a consumer. We only receive complaints from competitors of these companies. So I think it was about time that we did something about it. Again, we had lots of cases, but the cases have proven 2 things. First of all, cases are lengthy, investigations are complex. To understand the markets is complex. And then we have long proceedings before the judiciary, which are lengthy as well, which are complex as well, where again we see economic and legal expertise to a great amount. And at the same time, sometimes you have a panel where a representative of one of these companies is on the panel, and they say, well, we might change the algorithm slightly. And at the same time, you see 10 people in the room frowning because that might cost them their business model, because one of these companies is changing the algorithm. And we take years in order to go against these kind of conducts and kind of behaviors, which might have the aim to hinder competitors. I mean, having said that, it's not a wonder that legislators around the world have thought about what we can do about this. And it's not a wonder that you have seen legislative initiatives all over the world. Indeed, Germany was very quick and has responded quite actively. We have had 2 amendments of the German Competition Act in recent years, both with a focus on the digital economy. The last one brought a new section in our law, Section 19A, by which we can designate companies of paramount significance for competition across markets. You can see, I can say it without reading it. That is the name we gave to these companies. Again, I said that at the European level, we have seen the DMA. In other member states of the European Union, we've seen other initiatives. We've seen initiatives in Australia, one can really say around the world. I think the big issue now is how that all goes together. And here we come still to the topic of cooperation. But here I want to come back to what Margrethe Vestager has said. We have all these new regimes now, especially here in Europe. And I think we must take utmost care also, especially again in Europe, but not only here, that we make these instruments, these new instruments, complementary, and that we kind of develop maybe joint action, the joint strategies in order not to duplicate work, but to make best effort of the instruments and first of all of the resources that we have. I mean, I do not know any competition agency that is not suffering from a lack of resources. So in order to combine all this, I'm absolutely sure we can be very, very successful. But again, this needs a lot of also international cooperation in order not to waste what we have, but to make the best effort out of this.
Well, thank you, Andreas. We in the United States are severely resource constrained as well. It's a real problem. And I agree with you. It's like we have to impose a remedy on ourselves of interoperability. So Benoît, can you share your thoughts on this important topic?
Thank you, Holly. And let me start by saying that it's really crucial that we can sit together and exchange views and compare notes on what we've been doing. The challenges are similar when it comes to the consequences of the rise of big digital platforms, and we have to learn from each other's experiences, and we have to coordinate internationally. So I mean that conference generally and that roundtable particularly are really very useful. Trying to reflect on what has been the French experience when it comes to digital, and here, by the way, I want also to particularly commend my predecessors, and particularly Isabel de Silva, who's been really leading that agenda until recently. I was thinking that maybe the best way to summarize what we've learned from our experience is about 3 Ds. So the first D would be a diversity of instruments that we need to face the challenges. The second D is probably about the discretion that we need in choosing the instruments and picking the right tool to address a particular situation. I may, by the way, add a 4th D, which is that we need to dare use all our instruments. And we need dialogue, certainly, across institutions. I mean, in our case, vertically with the Commission, horizontally with our other ICN members, and certainly also with other regulators, particularly privacy and industry regulators. And just to illustrate the theme of the diversity of instruments, I mean, just to pick a few examples of what we've been able to do. We found out that our legal framework, that is a combination of Article 102 and French law, to put it very simply, has been very powerful to address a number of cases in different ways, and to address both abuse of exclusion and abuse of exploitation, which can both arise when we deal with systemic platforms. And diversity of solutions has been key. So just to give just 2 examples. In our 2021 decision in the News Corp case, we found that Google had abused its dominant position by granting preferential treatment to its proprietary technologies, and Google asked for a settlement. So we use a settlement technique, and they proposed commitments to improve the interoperability of Google Ad Manager services with third parties. And we also fined them 220 million. And the whole process took 18 months, so which is fairly fast in our world. So that's the first example. Second example is a case that was presented in more detail yesterday, so I'm not going to go back to it in detail, but that's the relationship between, again, Google and the press and publishers, so the so-called neighboring rights or related rights issue. France was the first country to implement the EU directive on publishers' rights into national law. And the reaction of Google was to decide that it would no longer display publisher content unless it would be free. So we didn't like it very much, and we found it to be likely to be anti-competitive and to cause some. And we found that more importantly, that this caused immediate and serious harm to the press sector. And so we imposed interim measures. So that's another instrument. They're still binding, and then Google came back with commitments to implement the interim measures. And that was basically about finding the right framework to negotiate in good faith with publishers. And we're still not there. We're coming closer to it, but we're still not there. And so we have this full range of, this full toolbox of possible instruments when dealing with digital platforms, interim measures, commitments, settlement, and of course, fines. And we have to be able to use all of them in different cases. I would think that the DMA fits into the same framework. It's another instrument. It's a very powerful instrument that will be at the hand of the European Commission. It's an ex-ante instrument, as we know, as compared to what I've just described, which is a toolbox of ex-post instruments. And the complementarity can be very powerful. There are a number of preconditions. So that's Olivier's homework. It's important that the scope of the DMA is clearly defined. So just to give you an example, we have this new FRAND clause, which was added at 11 p.m. the last day, almost, which as it stands today, could possibly apply to a very broad field of digital services. So I guess we will need clarity, and the industry certainly will need clarity on what it means. Both enforcers and systemic platforms, gatekeepers, will need clarity on what it means. And we'll need good, robust mechanisms and smooth mechanisms to ensure consistency and close coordination with the Commission and also in the ECN. Just maybe one word of conclusion on the DMA. I mean, I come from a different background. I come from financial regulation and central banking, and when I landed in this new universe, I mean, it was a very smooth landing, but I had a few surprises. And one surprise was to see all the competition community around me, looking at the DMA as an entirely new concept, something entirely new, revolutionary, ex-ante regulation. That's something we've never done. Well, coming from financial regulation is just, the bread and butter of banking regulation, that we have capital requirements. And since the great financial crisis, we have a global, systemically important financial institution or systemically important bank, SIFI or SIB concept. And it works very well. So, there are lessons to learn from other fields. And I guess these are just different instances of the same principle. In financial regulation, you have this principle that no financial institution should be too big to fail, right? And that's what we've implemented after the financial crisis. In competition, we are now moving to a principle that no company should be too big to be regulated, and it's very simple.
Thank you, Benoît. That's really interesting, and I really love your concept of the 3 Ds. So now let's turn to PAFNA and hear the Competition Commission of India's perspective about proposed changes in India and your views on the interplay of regulation and enforcement.
Thank you, Holly. A very good morning to all. I would like to begin by conveying the compliments of the Indian Competition Authority to the ICN for organizing this conference and to the German Competition Authority for hosting it so well. Well, the Competition Commission of India will be completing 13 years of its enforcement on the 20th of this month. And 13 years, we are indeed very young when compared to many other competition regulators present in this room who have been enforcing competition law for almost several decades now. And I would say that our learning has been very steep, and it is rather humbling to see that the challenges which are being faced by many matured competition regulators in the digital economies are not so different from what we are facing in India. In last few years, we have seen an increased number of cases in the digital economy, and that ranges from search engines to e-commerce marketplaces to cab aggregators to online food delivery apps, travel intermediaries, app store policies, data sharing policies, and the issues which were raised in those cases were in fact very novel, which I am sure all of you already know, belonging from the competition fraternity. Issues relating to platform neutrality, issues relating to price parity arrangement, data sharing policies, and several others. As of now, our focus has been on the enforcement framework, and we are approaching those cases through the enforcement approach. And our ex ante approach is limited to the combination cases that come to us. And we do not really have competition-specific ex ante regulation when it comes to the digital market sector. Our government had set up a competition law review committee, which submitted its report in 2019. And amongst other things, one of the issues that was tasked to the competition law review committee was to see whether the existing competition law framework is sufficient to deal with the challenges of the new age economy. And the broad observations of the committee was that the act is flexible to cover the cases or the issues that are coming from the new age markets. But yes, they came up with certain recommendations. Two of the recommendations which are very important for the digital markets. One was inclusion of the deal value test as a threshold to see whether a particular combination is required to be notified under the act. And that was indeed to catch hold of the transactions which were falling through the cracks because the transaction, asset or turnover threshold was not able to really capture that transaction. The second recommendation of the Competition Law Review Committee was to include control over data as a factor to see market power and abuse of dominant position cases. And the recommendations of the Competition Law Review Committee, it has now been transformed into a competition law amendment bill, and it is under the legislative consideration right now. And also under the consideration are several ex ante regulations coming from the different parts of the government. So it's not that the digital economy has not really sounded in India, and it's not that India is not looking at them from the ex ante perspective. So there are several other departments of the government. So for example, we have the data protection bill, which is under the legislative consideration right now, which would be looking at the collection and processing of user data. Then we also have the e-commerce rules, which are being formulated by the Consumer Protection Authority, which will be looking at the exploitation of consumer by the e-commerce websites. So I would say that when we talk about the ex ante regulations, it is not really a question of whether, it is only a question of when. And there are so many interesting things already happening across the globe. There is DMA by the EU and several other similar developments. And we have regulators who are having experience. The German Competition Authority, they came up with something in 2020, and they are already working on that. So I would only conclude by saying that we are keeping a very, very close watch, and we are having a great interest in how these things will roll out in the future. And we are, it goes without saying, that open to learning from the experience of other regulators. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Papna. So let's move back to Europe now. Olivier, we're enormously impressed with the ability of Brussels to pass meaningful tech regulation in such a short time. Congratulations on that. We're all really keen to hear your views on this topic.
Well, thank you very much. I like the actually 4 Ds of Benoît. So I'd like to continue the alphabet, and I'm happy it didn't pick E. I would have been embarrassed with F. But so I would say 3 E's: enforcement, enforcement, enforcement.
That's great.
It's not contradictory, it's complementary. But it's important because that's what we do. And we have quite a good enforcement record in recent years in that field, in the Commission. I want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to my friend and predecessor, Johannes Leitenberger. He was here yesterday. I hope he's still here today, because the track record is truly impressive. I mean, 3 prohibitions against Google in recent years, 2 against Qualcomm, a number of commitment cases as well, and the pipeline is also very good. Google Ad Tech, Amazon Marketplace, Facebook Marketplace. No later than last week, we opened proceedings in the Apple Pay case. And of course, it's important, and of course, it's not enough, because if it were enough, we wouldn't have had to produce the DMA. And it's not enough, not so much because, I mean, back to the conversation we had yesterday morning, dodgy remedies or stuff like this, because most of these cases are prohibition. It's not enough because the nature of these markets, the rapidity at which they tip, the power of the network effects makes it that you're bound to be too late. Even if you're as quick as you can, you're bound to be too late. And that's why we decided it was time to move to outright prohibition for those conducts that we invariably found to be detrimental when implemented by these large platforms throughout the last 25 years. And still were reiterated one way or the other, because it's not that they are super imaginative. It's always the same things. In a new market, in a slightly different ways, but it's always the same thing. It's leveraging, it's bundling, it's tying, it's self-referencing. It's not terribly new, but it's very, very effective. And it pays off, otherwise, despite the very large fines, they wouldn't continue to do it. So that's the very rationale for the DMA. And it's important to keep that in mind. Now, to address your question about the interplay and how it will work, I think there are 2 aspects, and Andreas covered some, and Benoît as well. There is a within Europe aspect, and there is Europe and the rest of the world aspect, of course. Within Europe, the first challenge will be to design the implementing rules, because Benoît is right. A number of the provisions in the DMA need to be precised in order to be implementable. And the example he gave is one of these cases. So we have a 6-month period starting at the date of entry into force to do that. That is long and that is short, of course. And that will be the task of the Commission. But of course, we will do it consulting the colleagues and friends in the ICN. So that I would say is the first challenge. And at the same time, we expect that although the dialogue for the designation will not have formally started, that of course we will have informal contacts with the platforms, because this is the reasonable thing to do on both sides, rather than waiting the formal date at which it will start. The second challenge within Europe will be to design together smart enforcement strategies using all of our tools, because we have national legislations, which are diverse in Germany and other countries. We have national competition laws. We have EU competition law, which is our common goods. And now we have the DMA. And it is not by chance that the co-legislators decided to enshrine the coordination of all this within the European Competition Network, because this is truly where it belongs to. And it will be our collective responsibility to leave our egos, institutional egos, at the entry door, and agree together for each and every case who's best placed, which instruments make sense, what's the sequence, in order to have the most possible effective enforcement. If we don't manage this, we will fail. So basically, we have all a very strong incentive to do it. And also, I guess, at inception, it will be very difficult to know who's best placed for what, which instrument will be. My guess is that we will not really know what will fall in the end under competition rules, what will fall in the national provisions, or best fall within national provisions, and what will have to fall within the DMA. And that's why it was, I think, smart to foresee an identity in procedures and processes so that we can transfer evidence and decide maybe to make the allocation at a later stage after having carried out a first investigation, either by national competition authorities or by the Commission, or actually by both, in coordination. So all this we'll need to discuss with the colleagues within the ICN. We will need to formalize how we want to make decisions in that respect, and then we will have to operate it. And that will be challenging, but I have no doubt we will manage. And then there is us collectively implementing all these rules vis-à-vis the colleagues in the other competition authorities around the world, because there is, I mean, let's face it, there is a paradigm shift. If I look in the US, if I look in Australia, if I look in India, Korea, other jurisdictions, there is an alignment that I've not seen ever before on these matters. And they will or will not have or have already specific legislations in other jurisdictions. But in a way, whether they have specific legislations or whether they implement their competition regime doesn't make a big difference. We'll have to make sure that we reach collectively the right outcome, and that we do not make enforcement in other jurisdictions more complicated, so that we lead the platform behavior where we want it to go to. And that will be a second challenge, which will need quite a lot of close bilateral cooperation. And also multilateral. I think the ICN will have a very big role to play in that respect.
Well, thank you, Olivier. That really tees up nicely for the next question that Soohyun is going to open with, about how we can improve international interaction among different regimes. You know, isolating big tech and regulation is just another example of why our international consensus is so important. You know, we need to address the gaps and the overlaps, you know, due to the global nature of these firms. You know, one thing that I thought could really help us is to look at how we've handled situations like this in the past. A good example is how our merger regimes developed. We saw the rapid adoption of merger control in the 1900s and early 2000s. You know, at the time, we failed to pay sufficient attention to how the procedural aspects of merger control would interact across countries in multi-jurisdictional merger review. The result has been we've spent the last 20 years engaged on defining best practices, including and notably here at the ICN. ICN members have spent considerable time and effort working to change practices and legislation to create an interoperable system for us in merger review. So I think the really important question is how can we learn from that experience in digital markets? You know, with that in mind, I think the key question is what kind of mechanisms do we need to address interoperability in digital regulation, and what should we be thinking about today to ensure smooth enforcement and regulatory interaction? Soohyun, you want to give us your thoughts, and then we'll turn to Olivier and Andreas to weigh in as well.
Okay, first of all, Andreas and Holly, thank you for having me here. As you usher in the digital era, big techs and other multinational companies now play a major role in the global economy. Along with the digitalization, competition issues that are not limited within a country's borders are on the rise. In terms of access to information, competition authorities are often in an unfavorable position compared to enterprises. So competition authorities are seeking various ways to collaborate in order to deal with cross-border issues. In merger area, competition authorities have already been working in active cooperation. Particularly, waivers of confidentiality can help prompt information sharing between competition authorities. Businesses that want to strike a merger deal are likely to agree to a waiver of confidentiality, as it can serve as an incentive by reducing legal uncertainties, expediting review process, and in turn saving their time and money. A case in point was the attempted merger between Applied Materials and Tokyo Electron, semiconductor equipment manufacturers. The Korea Fair Trade Commission actively discussed details such as review schedules and level of remedies with the US DOJ and other authorities including China, Japan, and Taiwan. Based on such cooperation, the KFTC and DOJ simultaneously notified the review results to the merging parties and were able to swiftly block the merger by expressing consistent statements. Also, in dealing with unilateral conduct, we boosted the effectiveness of case handling by sharing information through waivers and conference calls. In the case of the Qualcomm's abuse of dominance, the KFTC shared the review report with the US FTC through a waiver. And the EU, DigiComp, helped us investigate the recent Google case by sharing their opinions through conference calls. However, when it comes to cases involving unilateral conduct, there's less incentive to encourage businesses to agree to waiver of confidentiality. So authorities are less likely to benefit from waivers compared to mergers or cartel cases. Therefore, competition authorities should strive to enhance international cooperation in unilateral conduct cases to the level of the cooperation in merger cases. Actively seeking ways to share information and making the best out of them would be the first step of international cooperation. More specifically, the ways include expansion of use of the existing information sharing tools, such as waiver and conference calls. Second, joint market research for particular markets. And third, exchange of confidential information without the waiver through information gateway, which is based on each jurisdiction's competition law, or the second generation cooperation agreement. Authorities also need to look for how to communicate with each other to coordinate on decisions on anti-competitive effects or the level of remedies. I'll stop here.
Well, thank you, Soohyun. In the US, we're thinking really hard about how we might better allow for information exchange outside the merger context as well. Olivier, what are your thoughts here? Do you have anything to add?
Well, I made my pitch in my previous intervention, yeah. But I mean, it is clear. I mean, these platforms are global by essence. So we need to be global in the answer as well. And of course, it's for each of the jurisdictions to decide what is the precise answer they want to give to it. We have already a fair degree of homogeneity in our competition law standards, which allows a very, very good cooperation currently. And I think that we should continue. Then, of course, it would be highly desirable that if there are, to the extent there are specific regimes like the DMA elsewhere, that they're not completely incompatible one with the other, because that risks creating more problems than other things. But as we know, parliaments are sovereign, so they will decide whatever they want. But and at least they will certainly be different. The chance that they're identical is very near to zero. And it will be for us to make them work together through very intensive cooperation. So yes, it will be absolutely crucial.
Yeah, no, I think the multinational organizations here have a very important role to play. Andreas, Do you want to share some thoughts on this as well?
Yeah. In fact, I see 3 layers of cooperation among us. The first one, of course, is the global perspective that we take here at the ICN. And there has been very much going on already. To start with the OECD, there is a joint report with the ICN on international cooperation in competition enforcement with a view to the digital economy. And that shows already in itself how much we can benefit as competition agencies from this kind of cooperation. There have been other OECD projects in this respect on digital ecosystems and also on ex-ante regulation, from which we have benefited a lot when we looked at what we can do in our respective jurisdiction. The second organization is where we are today, is the ICN. We started to take up this topic early on. I think in 2015 we started at the Sydney conference with a special project on vertical restraints in online markets. I mean, this is where it all came from online vertical restraints long time ago. But that was the initial start also for the Bundeskartellamt to do all these digital cases. We have started there in 2015. In 2020, the ICN has established a very important working group on the intersection between competition, consumer protection, and privacy, because I think here we still have to find out where are the limits, where we can go as competition agencies, but on the other side, where do we have to go when it comes to privacy? What is our room for maneuver here if we assess dominance of digital companies, dominance that is data-driven? And if it is data-driven, of course, we might have to go into privacy issues, or maybe we don't have to go into that. But this is something we can find out together, I guess, in such projects. Look at the work that is done in the ICN, in the Unilateral Conduct Working Group, that is very much focusing on digital matters. Assessing dominance in the digital era is an important issue here. So you see, at this layer, there is already a lot going on in order to set certain joint standards, to establish common views on the assessment of these markets, and maybe also on how to tackle these markets and what kind of instruments we might be able to use in this respect. The second layer are the regional networks. Of course, from my perspective, first and foremost the ECN, but we have others in South America. We have the African Competition Forum where this is looked at. And I think this is extremely helpful because then you have the perspective of the regional area you live in and can develop maybe even joint tools as we do now in the European Competition Network. And that maybe you can take a joint approach. That is already a very close cooperation because it is not only about developing joint standards. In a way, it's about joint enforcement already. So I think this is very important to look at, these regional networks. And last but not least, of course, we have a third layer that is bilateral cooperation that can be very important too. I remember the joint exercise that we had with the French Autorité, with a joint paper on big data on competition, the joint paper on algorithm and competition. We have joint competition days between Germany and France where we tackle these issues. And by the way, it is extremely helpful if you work in parallel on similar cases, that you exchange on that basis how to proceed and what you can achieve with competition law in a certain area. And I think this is extremely helpful because this is not about joint enforcement, but it's about facilitating your own enforcement based maybe on the experience of another agency, maybe an agency that is very close to you, as the French and the German competition authorities are. I think here we can learn a lot from each other, how to proceed, what works, and maybe what does not work. So these are the three layers we must make use of. So you see there's a lot going on. As the chairman of the steering group of the ICN, I very often heard the demands to do more with regard to international cooperation. And if I look at what we do already, sometimes I lack the fantasy what we could put on top to a certain extent. I'm always open to that. But if you take stock, you see that there is already a lot going on, and maybe it can be expanded. But this is exactly why we are here, and on what we can. Maybe I go home with some good ideas from this conference on what we could do more and could do better.
That's great. Well, we've definitely got an emerging consensus on doing some further work on these procedural aspects of digital markets in the international sphere. So I thought we could now turn to our third round question and talk more specifically about competition tools for enforcement in digital markets. Think about, are our tools that we have fit for the purpose? Do we need additional powers? How do we move the dialogue outside of our own agencies towards a consensus? And to what extent has the push for ex-ante regulation shaped the discussion on enforcement tools? Andreas, I'd like to turn it back to you. Can you start the discussion off here, given Germany's experience in enforcement under existing laws and the adoption of new amendments to address competition concerns in the digital space?
Yeah, I can be brief on that. I very much underline what Olivier has said. If you leave it to competition law, I think you are late by nature, because competition law is a very reactive tool. You take up a conduct that is already in place. And if you haven't done an analysis of the position of a company in the market, before you can start to assess conduct, and before you can start to prohibit a certain conduct, you have to investigate about the position of the company. Is it dominant? Is it super dominant? What kind of position does it have? And here I believe the instruments that we are about to create, or which we are already created in Germany, are a good basis. I'm not saying they are a role model for others, but they can serve as an example. And if you look at the Section 19a, the new created section in the German competition law, we take the decision that a company falls under this section once. And once this is done, for 5 years, it is clear this company is a company of paramount significance for competition across markets. So for all further proceedings, of course, this is a huge advantage, because you do not have to prove anymore, are they dominant in this market? Are they dominant in that market? Are there any justifications or whatever? No, it is clear it is a company that falls under this ruling, similar in the DMA, and it is clear for a couple of years that you can act and regulate conduct on the basis of this ruling. This is a huge step forward for me, because you do not have to do the analysis again and again in every case with all these complex questions that need to be answered. So this is the first point. The second point, again, if you look at Section 19a, it is not as clear as the DMA with regard to certain conduct. That is an advantage on the one hand, because it is able and feasible to catch further conduct easier. The difficult thing, of course, is you need to assess the conduct again and again. That is better in the DMA. So I can only say, if you are looking for a role model, sometimes I think do something between Section 19a and the DMA, and you are on the right track. Personally, I find the DMA has its favors. This is why we have done it that way. It contains certain examples of conduct that are forbidden. Self-preference, for example, is mentioned like in the DMA. Other data-related conduct is mentioned like in the DMA. So here, Section 19A and the DMA are very similar. But again, Section 19A is a bit more open with regard to the future and future conduct. So this is our approach. I hope we will follow that approach successfully. 2 designation processes already lie behind us with regard to Google, with regard to Meta. So now we have the opportunity in Bonn to look at the conduct of these companies and concentrate on that and find if they fulfill the examples that are expressly spelled out in Section 19A. I think this can be a way forward. We can do that, by the way, also on markets where these companies are not dominant or not dominant yet. Maybe this is also kind of a regulatory feature that we have in Section 19A. And I think now practice must show how successfully we can apply it in the future. One last thing on that, always think of the judiciary and court proceedings. We have made the experience that they can be lengthy as well. Decisions under Section 19A go directly to the Federal Supreme Court in Germany. There's only one instance. I think for the future, this may be a huge advantage when we talk about speeding up proceedings. Again, not only the administrative proceedings in the agency, but also the proceedings before court. We must think of it in a holistic picture.
Well, thank you. We in the United States, with the DMA and 19A, we're very jealous. It's, you're absolutely right. Trying to do enforcement, in many instances, it just takes too long and it's too late. And by the time you get to the courts, they can't even figure it out. The market's moved on. Benoît, what is your perspective here?
I mean, a lot has been said already about enforcement tools. So I think we all agree that we need a diverse set of instruments. We also need to be able to evolve this set of instruments. So certainly the DMA is a quantum leap, and we'll need to digest it. And there will be a learning curve. It will take a little bit of time. In Europe, the ECN Plus directive also has been instrumental in providing us with new instruments. In the French case, we now have the ability, thanks to the ECN Plus directive, we now have the ability to issue interim measures on our own initiative, which wasn't possible previously. It's a very welcome new step, and we very much intend to use it. Also under ECN Plus, all European enforcers now have the ability to impose structural injunctions. ECN Plus also gives us the ability to set our own priorities, which some agencies could do, some could not. Now we can do it. Which brings me actually to another issue which I very much wanted to throw into that discussion, which is about skills and capacity. I mean, we've discussed staffing, but it's not only about quantity, it's about quality, it's about skills. And we all need to hire the right skills to do digital enforcement, both antitrust and mergers. So in our case, we've created this digital economy unit. It's a small one, but they are now actively supporting the case handlers. I mean, they are themselves case handlers supporting all digital files, and they are contributing very importantly to industry studies. So, for instance, as some of you may know, we've launched this investigation into the cloud industry and the competitive structure of cloud services. There will be a public consultation around summer. It will kind of lead us until early 2023. We'll coordinate with the Commission and with trying to align with your own thoughts about cloud services. And that is all handled by this digital economy unit. But we will all be tapping the same set of skills: data scientists, with specialists of algorithm, maybe specialists of near-field communication, Olivier, as I understand, are going to be very important, etc. And there is already a lot going on inside the ECN in terms of bilateral communication. We've been learning a lot from what other agencies have been doing in specific technical fields, and will continue to do so. But there might be a case looking forward also to put more resources in common. That is, to be able to tap from a common set of technical skills. And here I'm building from my previous experience at the Bank for International Settlement, where my main task over the last 2 years was to build an innovation hub for the central banking community. Because we found out that we were all investing into blockchain technologies, new payment systems, ML applied to banking supervision, etc. So why not do it in common? And that's exactly what the BIS has decided to do with all global central banks as stakeholders. And moving towards something like this in the competition field, I think, would bring a lot of value. So having some kind of common support unit that could support us, providing different skills, being able to exploit the comparative advantages of different agencies when it comes to particular technologies. So that might be a dream, might be a little bit of science fiction, but I think that would be something worth considering.
Now, I think upskilling our technological expertise is critical. We're doing something very similar in the US, bringing on technologists to work on our case, and also thinking of studies to do. That's really encouraging about your cloud studies. Cloud services studies. So Pafna, can you tell us about the Competition Commission of India's enforcement experience here in digital markets?
Yeah, of course. Our experience, our limited experience, so as to say, has taught us that every digital market works, every platform works in a very different, unique manner. And we have certainly moved away from the traditional assessment framework where markets are defined in silos and then assessment of market power and the conduct is examined. In the digital markets, it is very important to understand that the markets interact with each other and there can be interdependencies between different user sites. And one of the most important things in the digital markets is that the specificities of the market has to be understood. Data has assumed a lot of importance in digital market, which was not the case earlier. And when I talk about data, it goes on through the assessment framework, whether you're defining the relevant market or you're assessing market power or you are examining the conduct. And our view as of now is that an over-reliance on a very formalistic framework may have its own sets of problems. And such framework relies on an assumption that one size fits all. And we have seen while dealing with various cases in the platform markets that every platform works in a different manner. So maybe when you're applying the competition law enforcement framework in one particular platform, it may not apply in the same sense in another case, in another platform. And even for one platform, maybe what you're applying today may become outdated 6 months from now. And this is how the platforms are moving. I would only say that we are learning from our experience, we are learning from the experience of the other regulators, and to enrich our understanding of the digital markets, the Commission has also undertook various market studies. And our expectation is that through those market studies, we will become wiser of how the markets work, and also most importantly, to understand how different stakeholders are affected by these markets. So as that our approach is not very formalistic and very limited to just one side of users. And in the e-commerce sectors, based on the market studies, we also came out with advisories on transparency and self-regulation, which was welcomed by many of the e-commerce platforms in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Pafna. Soohyun, what is your perspective on the issue? I understand KFTC has some proposals to facilitate enforcement initiatives. Certainly, this is something we're all very interested to hear about.
Thank you, Holly. Considering the characteristics of digital markets, competition authorities have acknowledged the need to take a quicker and more effective response to big tech's monopoly power. but there are some limitations to enforcing competition laws through a traditional method based on strict market definition. Also, once markets are monopolized, it becomes difficult to reverse the situation through ex post regulation due to TPing and network effects in platform markets. However, despite the common concerns shared by competition authorities, there may be differences in specific regulatory tools depending on each country's market situation and legal systems. In the case of Korea, major platform operators such as Naver, Korea's #1 search engine, and Kakao are competing with each other in addition to global tech giants like GAFA. Although it is different by specific market, some Koreans do not consider Korea's market monopolistic. In addition, Korea's Monopoly Regulation and Fair Trade Act not only includes regulation of monopolization, which is a key area of competition law, but also regulation of unfairness in the process of competition. The Act also regulates businesses without market dominant positions if they treat their counterparts unfairly by taking advantage of their superior positions or engage in unfair trade practices. In other words, Korea's competition law can be enforced effectively even before the digital markets are monopolized. Thus, at this point, the KFTC is enforcing laws more quickly and actively while improving the enforcement policy rather than introducing many new ex-ante regulations. To this end, the KFTC issued an administrative notice of the guidelines for unilateral conduct in platform markets in January this year. The guidelines specify requirements for market definition and market dominance assessment in platform markets, while providing the main types of law violations, including self-preferencing, prevention of multi-homing, tying, and most favored nation clauses. We are currently gathering and reviewing the opinions of stakeholders, and we expect to complete the guidelines within this year. The KFTC also launched the Digital Market Task Force and imposed remedies on Google last year for blocking the entry of new competitors in mobile OS and Android M markets. The KFTC not only defined the smart mobile device OS market, but also smart non-mobile device OS development market, including smart TVs and smart watches as an innovative market. The KFTC also imposed the remedies on Korea's #1 search engine Naver for manipulating its algorithms to favor its own shopping and video services, a kind of self-preferencing. Through these measures, we'll pursue a balanced policy by addressing possible harm resulting from monopolies without undermining dynamism and innovation of the digital market. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you, Soohyun. Olivier, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add here? I know you talked about your 3 E's. It seems like you could have some good ideas.
Well, very, very briefly, I mean, I said in my first intervention that, I mean, we have a good enforcement record, we have a good pipeline, it's not sufficient, we need DNA. And I think Benoît was right to point out that this is no revolution conceptually. I mean, it has happened several times in the past, and basically in all network industries. I mean, the liberalization of telecoms in Europe, good example, was achieved through competition policy and competition instruments. We did the same in financial services, DSP2, so the Directive for Services in Payment was strongly influenced by competition policy. And this is a feedback loop, because in return, it creates new frameworks, new problems, new issues for competition policy. So what I meant to say is that there is this relationship between regulation and competition policy, which is not idiosyncratic to platforms. It is It is true for platform because this is a network industry, as it is true for ever in any network industry. And what that means also is that creating the DMA is no substitute for making sure our competition tools are fit for purpose in the digital age. So that's the next step, or that's actually the step we took in parallel, because we launched 2 years ago when I took office, the biggest ever review of all our competition tool instruments. And one of the objectives is to make sure they're fit for purpose in the digital age. And Andreas recalled that it all started with vertical restraints and e-commerce, as you just said. And one of the things we need to do, for example, is to adapt our rules when it comes to vertical restraints. This is very much what we're doing with the new guidelines and the new block exemption regulation. Because the current guidelines, I mean, were issued at a time where it was about protecting e-distribution against the brick-and-mortar world. Well, this world is dead. This is not the issue of today. So the rule need to evolve. Same goes to a certain extent with the horizontal guidelines, but maybe more prominently for the market definition notice. Because our current market definition notice, I was joking with Philippe Lowe yesterday because we remembered the time where we were drafting it 25 years ago, which means there is not a word on digital, 0. And this is an area in which market definition issues have been prominent in the last 25 years in many, many ways, starting with how do you perform a Snip test in a no-price market? Well, you don't, so you have to find other ways. So the updated market definition notice, which I hope we will be able to publish for comments soon, addresses in particular all these points. So it's very important to also make sure the traditional tools are constantly updated to be fit for purpose. And last but not least, Margaret Vestager announced a few weeks ago that we are launching the very first phase in a possible review, well, in a review and a possible revision of Regulation 1. Because there also, I mean, I don't know whether we will revise in the end of the day, and it's a long process, and it's just the beginning, so we'll have ample time to consult, discuss among ourselves in the ICN, form views. But I'd like to understand better how the DMA will impact Regulation 1, how new issues will impact Regulation 1, and whether we need to change anything in that respect as well. So there is this constant feedback loop between the two worlds that I think is important to keep in mind.
Thank you, Olivier. We're all very keen to see what happens with Regulation 1. It's really the bedrock of your enforcement, and I agree. I think this type of self-examination of how we can improve our tools is very important. We're doing something similar in the US with our merger guidelines. So for our last round question, I'd like each of our panelists to offer some brief closing remarks touching on how we might build consensus on how we deal with the tech giants. Are we starting to see a consensus vision of what controlling the tech titans would look like? There seems to be a lot of agreement around interconnection, interoperability, and things like non-discrimination rules. And obviously, I think robust merger enforcement is important. Is consensus possible? How should we build it? And what can organizations like the ICN do? We've heard about the 3Ds and the 3Es. Let's hear from each of you, just a 1-minute response. Benoît, you want to start it off?
Yeah, I mean, first, it has been really, really vindicating and heartwarming to see so much commonality and so much convergence, not only on this stage but also in the room. So that's something we should continue. We should continue tapping the collective wisdom, knowledge, and practice in this room, and use the ICN and also use the OECD and other fora to strengthen this international understanding. When it comes to the ICN, more specifically, the Autorité de la concurrence is a co-chair of the Unilateral Conduct Working Group, the UCWG. The UCWG has devoted a significant part of its current workflow to digital matters. We have this multi-year project on assessing dominance in digital era, which is coordinated by DG Comp with the support of the Autorité de la concurrence. We have a survey led by our JFTC colleagues on theories of harm and design of remedies in digital markets. And we are also contemplating launching a new project on the use of urgency enforcement tools in the context of abuse of dominant position proceedings, which, as we discussed, is of particular relevance to digital markets. So there is a lot more we can do to build on the experience, and I will count on Andreas' leadership to lead us there. I stop here.
Olivier?
No, well, simply if you take a step back, I mean, 5 years ago, the amount of consensus we have around the issue of big tech would have been unthinkable. So that's the positive note I like to take. And I think now the next step is, and I think we're well on the way, is to try to agree on the basics of how they should be regulated. So that, as I said earlier, we strengthen each other rather than make our respective tasks more difficult. And this is where the ICN, but also the OECD and of course bilateral cooperation, Andreas was exactly right. It's important because you shape consensus by discussing. We were not the first to move, actually. Andreas was the first to move. Germany was the first to move, but we were one of the first movers, which is an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage because, of course, you shape the discussion. It's a disadvantage because you don't benefit for any learning curve. And I don't exclude at all that through these discussions, we're shaping a consensus. We say, well, gee, we need to change something in our Digital Market Act to be more effective, also more in line with international consensus. So for me, that's the next step. It will be exciting, and we can't fail because again, they're global. We need to be global in our response as well.
Partner?
Yeah. So I would say that, of course, consensus is necessary. There is no doubt about it. The only thing is that the consensus has to be thought through in the wake of ground realities. So we have GAFA, which are operating in almost all countries and posing similar challenges. But at the same time, we also have our national regional markets where we have national players in the digital economy. So the market structures in different countries can be very different. And when we are defining the markets, or when we are not so much defining the markets, but when we are assessing whether a particular player has market power or not, that can also be governed by certain national ground realities which are not uniform across jurisdictions. The second thing is that our legal regimes can be very different. So for example, in India, we do not have the concept of joint dominance or attempt to monopolization. So having uniform rules may not be the answer. I would say that yes, cooperation versus uniform rules is something we have to find a midway. Having said that, we understand that, of course, consensus is the way forward. We are all facing similar challenges, and we assure our full cooperation in whatever it takes to build that consensus. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're absolutely right. There will never be uniform.
Even though there is a higher level of consensus on the need to regulate big techs, it may be inefficient to set a goal that is too high and try to reach a consensus at this point. Instead, we could continue developing competition law tools and standards in digital markets based on the ICN Unilateral Conduct Working Groups or work product. Also, I believe that it will be more efficient for competition authorities to keep stock taking the interplay between competition law enforcement and ex-ante regulation. Thank you.
Andreas?
Yeah, as the conference host, being in charge also of the rest of the agenda, I'll be extremely brief.
And of the lunch.
I mean, look where we stand today. I think we already have a very broad consensus.
Yes.
First, that something needs to be done. Secondly, that we need kind of a regulatory approach, one way or another. One more, one less. But I think that is already a broad consensus. And where does this come from? I mean, it comes from the fact that we all face the same problems, but of course it also comes from meetings at the OECD, the ICN. We haven't talked about G7 today, but it is also discussed there. So I think we're on a very good road, maybe not to perfect consensus in terms of how do we tackle this case, but in terms of what instruments do we need, how do we proceed, what kind of companies to capture. And here I already see a very broad consensus. Look at this panel, you see, and we're on a good track.
Well, thank you very much. Let me close by saying this has been a tremendously fruitful discussion, and it's clear the ICN has a critical role to play here, and we've got much to just continue discussing. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.